inquiry. And I love it that you've got 2 questions for us, Charles. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. And I will say 2 words about myself. Yes, I live in Victoria. I worked at UVic for 36 years, taught all manner of undergraduate lab courses, and ran a drop-in center for students that were struggling with physics and so forth. So that's my background. The Jung-Pauli stuff that I have been immersed in came in very early in my life and has been with me and won't let go. Did you have a question?
I didn't.
Okay.
Sorry,
all right.
Answer.
I was asked to talk about Jung as a scientist, and there's a related question. Is Jungian psychology a science? And those things are intertwined and related. And so we'll get into both of those aspects. Make sure I can. So let's look at Jung's background, his scientific background. He went to university, went to medical school at Basel and Zurich. His coursework included physics and chemistry, biology, zoology, anatomy, physiology, neurology, neuroanatomy, pharmacology, psychology, psychiatry. So that was, he studied science, right? And he studied it deeply in the science of his day. That was 1890s in Switzerland, and these are the courses that you would encounter as you proceed along a path to a medical degree. And clearly they were empirical, scientific, and laboratory-based, often, courses, okay? But there was something more going on for him beyond just that kind of late 19th century science. In Switzerland at that time, particularly at those universities, there was a lingering influence of a philosophical movement that came up in the Romantic era. It was called Naturphilosophie, or nature philosophy. And it really colored Jung's experience and his thinking around the scientific subject that he was studying. Naturphilosophie searched for qualitative, symbolic meaning in natural forms. It sought holistic connections. Nature was seen as intelligent and symbolic, and mind and matter reflected each other. Psyche was a natural phenomenon with spiritual dimensions. So you can see that Jung was breathing in at a young student age some of the things that would, some of the ideas that would permeate his thought throughout the rest of his life. So the Naturphilosophen from the late 18th and early 19th century that were influential on Jung included Schelling and Goethe and Oken. And it was particularly in Oken's work where he would encounter the term archetype. Oken used slightly different, considerably different from Jung's use as Jung developed that concept, but that term was pre-existent to Jung. Did I skip ahead here? Yeah, no, that's fine. Now, clearly Jung's education was as a scientist, but he wanted to establish himself sort of in that milieu of science. So he would write about his own research in the following way: my scientific methodology is nothing out of the ordinary. It proceeds exactly like comparative anatomy, only it describes and compares psychic figures. Or he would write, psychic events are observable facts and can be dealt with in a scientific way. I observe, I classify, I establish relations and sequences between the observed data and I show the possibility of prediction. So again, what we'd call a classical, modern scientific approach to his work. Okay, but what really is going on in the modern science that enveloped Jung at that time? Well, the methodology is stated to be objective. You have empirically testable and repeatable experiments. You have causality, and you have predictability in modern science. The worldview that accompanies it is Cartesian, materialistic. There is a naive realism often attached to it. It's deterministic, it's reductionistic. All of that is what is sort of encapsulated in the notion of modern science. Okay. But let's go into it a little deeper, as he did with his concept of archetype. He tried to preserve a link to a biological explanation, and you'll see it here, and you'll see it particularly in the reference to inheritance and instinct. But I want to read through this sort of line by line because it is such an important statement by him. The concept of the archetype is derived from the repeated observation that, for instance, the myths and fairy tales of world literature contain definite motifs which crop up everywhere. We meet these same motifs in the fantasies, dreams, deliria, and delusions of individuals living today. These typical images and associations are what I call archetypal ideas. That's quite an important statement. The archetypal ideas are the specific images and associations. The more vivid they are, the more they will be colored by a particularly strong feeling tone. So there's a natural feeling tone associated with those ideas. They impress, influence, and fascinate us. They have their origin in the archetype, which in itself is irrepresentable, unconscious, pre-existent form that seems to be part of the inherited structure of the psyche and can therefore manifest itself spontaneously anywhere at any time. Because of its instinctual nature, the archetype underlines the feeling tone complexes and shared their autonomy. So there's a little bit of a partial explanation about the complex itself. It is archetypally based, and it is really resonates with that feeling that's associated with that particular archetype. He would then go on for further statements where the archetype has a biological nature. The term archetype is not meant to denote an inherited idea. Rather, it is an inherited mode of functioning corresponding to the inborn way in which the chick emerges from the egg, the bird builds its nest, a certain kind of wasp stings the motor ganglion of the caterpillar, and eels find their way to the Bermudas. In other words, it is a pattern of behavior. So beyond being any kind of specific image, it is a pattern of behavior. This aspect of the archetype, the purely biological one, is the proper concern of scientific psychology. Now this biological-based representation of archetype is developed further beyond what Jung's initial statements were. We find it in this statement by Anthony Stevens. By the way, how many folk do you know Jungians that obtained knighthood? There was Lawrence Vanderpost, Sir Lawrence, and there was also Sir Anthony Stevens. I don't know, does anybody know another knighted Jungian? Anyway, Sir Anthony Stevens made this statement in 1982. and it was updated. The book that he wrote at that time was Archetypes and Natural History of the Self, and it was updated in 2003. Okay. It says, the archetypal hypothesis proposes that we possess innate neuropsychic centers which have the capacity to initiate, control, and mediate the common behavioral characteristics and typical experiences of all human beings, irrespective of race, culture, or creed. So again, you see Stephen situating the concept of archetype or archetypal representation in a biological setting. Now, he wasn't the only one, and in fact, if you look at the biological and social sciences from the 1980s onwards, you'll find, look at the left-hand column, a number of different divisions of biology and social theory that in each case developed one or more concepts that approached or captured some of what was being discussed with as an archetype. And you can see the individuals, the researchers, the writers at that time who developed those different concepts. I won't read through them all, but you can see that there are points of contact between Jungian psychology and a variety of sciences that were and are present at the moment. So it seems that there's a place for the archetype concept in modern science, in biological science in particular. Okay, also even in the notion of chaos theory or complex systems theory, you have a notion like a strange attractor. You have the emergent dynamics that come up in complex systems. You have something called the equivalent class of complexes. All of them, by the various individuals who developed those concepts, they all touch upon something that resonates with the notion of Jung's archetype. Okay? So things are looking good for some kind of an integration of Jungian archetypal ideas with contemporary modern science. But modern science is not such a happy place all by itself, so to speak. On the left hand, we have that column of characteristics of what might traditionally be thought of as modern science. And then you have, on the right-hand side, all of the different issues that have come up with respect to those different categories that are challenges to what's called modern science. So you have the role of the observer-participator coming up, challenging objectivity. When you look at biological evolution and cosmology, it is challenging the notion of repeatable experiments in contemporary science. Quantum mechanics, particularly non-local connections, challenge causality. Loss of predictability in complex systems challenges the notion of predictability. Other issues are Cartesianism is challenged by supervenience and complexity. Materialism challenged by both quantum mechanics and particle physics. The notion, the naive realistic point of view is challenged by many researchers in cognitive science and quantum mechanics and relativity. The naive realistic stance is not really something that can be maintained anymore. Determinism is challenged by quantum mechanical notions of probability, and reductionism by the notion of emergence in complex systems. So let's just take a minute to go back to that definition of archetype that I read through very carefully, and there was this a bit of a phrasing where Jung stated, these typical images and associations are what I call archetypal ideas. The more vivid they are, the more they will be colored by particularly strong feeling tones. They impress, influence, and fascinate us. Well, here he's bringing feeling into something that he wants to also be able to discuss in a scientific context. Well, in this context of modern science, there's no room there for discussing feelings, so to speak. All of that criteria there does not provide a place for that. What is often said about modern science is that it leads to a disenchantment of our worldview. In other words, and this was formulated by Max Weber in 1917 in a talk that he gave called Science as a Vocation, and it's been very much pointed to over the last century that we are progressing through a sense of disenchantment with our modern scientific worldview. It's a worldview where the spiritual and the divine are given no place, and where science and religion are irreconcilable. In fact, if you want to maintain a religious belief, it requires a sacrifice of the intellect if you're wanting to think in the modern context. So in a disenchanted world, the world that was pointed to by Max Weber, there is no genuine mystery and no inherent meaning. Meaningless world. Well, look what happened to the archetype concept when Jung explicated it further. He would tell us that it had a numinosity. What is numinosity? The term numinous was originally used by Rudolf Otto, used to describe a personal experience of spiritual powers derived from the ancient Latin term numen, meaning the power or nod of a deity. Jung often used it to characterize the affective charge associated with the personal experience of an archetype. So you have this feeling-toned experience, this affective charge that is part and parcel of the archetype. Worse than that is Jung's acknowledgement and exploration of the phenomena of synchronicity. Well, what is synchronicity? There's a long discussion about that that could be had. But just to summarize one of his most compact statements about what synchronicity is. Synchronicity is a coincidence in time of two or more causally unrelated events which have the same or similar meaning. So meaning becomes important. Synchronicity therefore consists of two factors. An unconscious image comes into consciousness either directly, literally, or indirectly, symbolized or suggested in the form of a dream, idea, or premonition. And then also an objective situation coincides with this content. So you have a real problem here with the injection of meaning into a worldview that modern science would claim is meaningless, that meaning does not belong in modern scientific worldview. So we have to move beyond, and are moving beyond, a modern scientific worldview. The term re-enchantment has entered the picture. Re-enchantment is a recognition that, in fact, the world does have objective meaning, as inherent objective meaning, that this is not a regression to a past form of pre-scientific or mythical practices. It's not a regression to a simply held belief systems. It is a view of these systems from a new perspective, It's one that can integrate rational and mythic viewpoints while respecting the limitations of each. And it recognizes the role of archetypes in both the realms of mind and matter. So the notion that a coincidence may carry meaning, that in some sense meaning resides in the universe beyond subjectivity of the individual experiencing the event, is now an unfathomable proposition for a disenchanted modern science, but it is now brought back into the discussion for a re-enchantment of science, the science which, let's give it another name, an archetypally based science. Okay. There are two books I'll just draw your attention to among many. These are just in the last couple of years that are good go-to books for diving into the subject matter in a serious and carefully written way. One is by Roderick Mayne. He's at the University of Exeter, and he goes into this notion of disenchantment and re-enchantment in quite good depth. Another one is a collection of essays. Mayne has an essay or two in this collection as well, but there are a number of other folks who have written essays about synchronicity. And it's new stuff. It's in the last, published in the last 2 or 3 years. So this is a good resource to look at as well. That one is The Playful Universe. And it is edited by Marjorie Wollicott, David Lorimer, and Gary Schwartz. I'll put them over here and take a look at them when we have a chance. When we take a break. Can I ask if you have any questions?
What was the previous book title?
The previous one was Breaking the Spell of Disenchantment. Okay. And that's by Roderick Mayne. A Google search on Roderick Mayne is, and also just a YouTube search. He's got a number of discussions on YouTube that are, freely viewable. So I think he's a good source. There's a lot of material out there on synchronicity now. Some of it good, some of it not so good. So we have to proceed with a little bit of care on it. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question about, it seems like throughout most of Jung's life, there's always that tension between his very scientific, rationalist approach to psychology, but then also his more, enchanted view of the world. Right. Can you speak yourself about how you've seen that or read about that, or why you think that tension is always existing, or how that kind of played out in his life?
So can we just take a minute to make sure everybody could hear that? You were speaking and I caught a bit of it, but I missed some. There was a tension in Jung between
the kind of scientific and rationalistic side.
Scientific and rational side.
And then the more enchanted side.
The enchanted and potentially mystical.
Religious.
And religious,
use terminology.
Luminous,
whichever one,
A number of those terms we had brought forward by your comparisons, which were amazing.
Yeah. And
Jung put this just front and center. I guess it was his dilemma, and he was subject to it, and the decision was in fact made to publish the Red Book, and you could see, in glorious detail, those tensions. But I think, in general, they're tensions that all of us feel, or could feel. We can open ourselves up to that feeling, I would suggest that it's part of our human nature. Yeah.
And the part that we've been busy ignoring.
Yeah, well, it's been discredited. It's this disenchantment process, not to blame other people for it, those bad scientists, but the whole culture has necessarily gone through this process of a disenchantment and now opening itself up to re-enchantment. This Roderick Mayne makes a very interesting argument that in fact this sequence of a process, let's call it, of initial enchantment and then moving into a disenchanted phase and then beyond that to re-enchantment is in fact picking up something of the individuation process of an individual. An individual goes through these stages. He makes it fine, and I invite you to read his statement and not mine so much, but he makes a fine argument that the individual in the individuating process is going through these stages as well, and now we have it on a human level, a cultural level for sure, that this is coming up not only individually but collectively for humanity. Yeah.
So the irrational is reasserting itself. Is that
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah.
The irrational, did you say?
Yeah,
reasserting itself?
you could think of irrational or perhaps a more, I like the word non-rational. Okay. Rationality itself has its bounds, its limitations. One can study the limits of rationality and find that, yes, in fact, humans go beyond that. They go beyond that when they go into poetry, for example. Poets are not necessarily rational thinkers. They're expressing something with symbols and metaphors and so forth that takes it beyond a simple rational statement. And other beyond poets, people who get into various types of mysticism and so forth clearly are operating beyond the bounds of rationality. And we know, we read, we listen to people who are very fine cognizing individuals who are nevertheless are not operating in a rational mode as they express themselves. Excuse me. Sure. Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about the numinous as it relates, as Jung would describe it, relating to archetypes, and maybe if you or anyone sort of has an example?
Well, if you find an archetype coming up in your life, and we all usually, if we're attentive to dreams and fantasies and so forth, they are coming up for us. Let's talk about some of the most, universal encounters that we have in dreams and such. We may encounter the shadow. We may encounter the contrasexual opposite, the anima or the animus. And in each case, we may have a horrifying, nightmarish kind of introduction to the shadow, which upon engagement with it and some give and take with that shadow figure, it evolves as well in the sequences of our dreams involving the shadow. Nevertheless, there is that deep feeling tone with that archetypal expression. It doesn't come up as neutral, feeling neutral kind of experience. No, it really grabs us. And that's probably why we go to the cinema or watch movies on Netflix or whatever. It's for that grab, that strong feeling connection, and that the closer it gets to resonance with an archetypal image, or an archetype, put it that way, the more that feeling is there and snapping us to and making us pay attention to it. Okay, and all spectrum of feeling can be, depending on what's grabbing us, which archetype is being called up for us, we get all kinds of feelings as a result of that.
So you were asking about numinous quality, and an example. I don't know whether anyone would want to share one, or if someone could do that, but I think would you?
Yeah.
Please.
I've been working with this archetype thing, and I realize that I have a very strong father complex, an archetype of the father. And I think it's because I was enculturated in a religious, cultural perspective where there was a lot of male dominance and patriarchy. So whenever I encounter a situation where I feel that I'm in a similar relationship where there's a lot of domineering, patriarchal type that whole feeling just comes up again. And I think maybe that's what you mean by newness. And it's so, I'm becoming aware of it now, but it's just like, oh, here it is again, that, overbearing father, and that, religious context of how a woman should be and behave in that context. It's no longer culturally or socially relevant, but you do experience it.
Is it like it arrives and
It
it's
just
a
comes
feeling
in.
that's with you?
It's like sometimes when I hear, we spoke of Donald Trump, and honestly, like whenever I hear some of his talking, the whole thing just comes up again, and I just feel so outraged by it. Like how can this happen in this day and age where we're socially, equal and trying to be, engaging with people of all different genders and races and creeds and cultures, but it just seems to be this thing that sort of comes, and I don't know if that's what you mean by numinous in terms of this unconscious feeling.
No, you pointed to something I think is really, one of the places you're going to find it, a complex about your parents, either positive or negative, with a father or a mother. Very, very, very common places for that strong feeling to emerge that is part of the numinosity, nice word, numinosity of the archetype. Okay. And we often, one of the things we have to do to sort these things out is to realize we're projecting that inner feeling, that inner state onto others and say, oh, that's mom, that's my mother. Or you don't like your mother, or you had a bad time with your mother, and you react negatively to that person because she reminds you of your mother and the father, and so on. Right? But that role of projection, that action of projection is huge in sorting out, what complex you have that is really alive and grabbing hold of you.
Yeah, so does that make sense in terms of how you can, and then you're like when you're experiencing it, you're just like, oh my God, there it is again, and I'm just having this same uncontrollable reaction, and then when you realize what you're doing, you're just like, I don't want to be that person anymore, but it just sort of just...
There's an energy to it, and it's you're recognizing it as having a focused energy. We have another question here.
Well, just to address this, like for me, my understanding of numinous is that it has this kind of spiritual, coming from another realm quality, so it elevates over the complex to say something about it, like a divination almost. And to just give a really simple and personal example, I've had a thing for many years with butterflies. And obviously it's cliche, butterflies transformation, but I'm somebody who has developed such a rich narrative within myself that butterflies show up in these synchronous moments for me, and it signals to me something that's being communicated from the above to me. It's not cognitive. It's like it happened today that I had a moment, I had a fear thought, and then in the next instant I saw somebody with a butterfly on a t-shirt. You know, and it's like, does that mean anything? Well, not to anybody else, but to me, it meant something deeply meaningful. And what it meant was there was some sense of being held by the bigger, right? And so that, I think, is a really like an example of how the symbology opens up this vehicle to the but at the same time it's personal, even though it's happening in such a cliche format that the moment I say butterfly, everyone gets it, and maybe other people in the room similar.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both. And I would say the other realm that we get this is like visionary things when people are sainted. And there will be like just an unwrapped, I don't know even how to put words to it, but this much larger and a presence almost that isn't generated from inside you. You may recognize it as something distinct. So I think there's quite a continuum of what that would be. And please jump in, Charles, or Phyllis, or David, because I know this is something that actually you could speak to too.
Yeah, I want to jump out and let David jump in and in his time and carry on the conversation.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you willing? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For that.